We're almost there. Just a little further.
Can't. So cold.
Yes, you can.
I just wanted to go home after another exhausting shift. But on that freezing night, I found a bloodied man abandoned in an alley, and I decided to save him. I thought I was helping a stranger. The next morning, 300 men surrounded my house. My mother was crying. My sister was looking for something to defend herself with, and I was certain I had destroyed my family's life. Then all those men knelt before him. That was the moment I discovered who was really sleeping on my couch, and I realized it was already too late to turn back. Hi, I'm Lena. A special shout out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Chapter 1: The Woman in the Red Scarf. The shift had been long enough for me to feel the weight of my scrubs like a second skin. I walked out the side door of Cleveland's public hospital at 11 at night, the red scarf wrapped twice around my neck and my bag slung carelessly over my shoulder. The cold bit my face before I even stepped onto the street. The day's snow had turned to gray slush on the sidewalks, and the wind pushed the smell of fuel and disinfectant away from the building, as if the city wanted to forget that hospital existed. I crossed the empty avenue and turned into the alley that cut through the block to the staff parking lot. It was a familiar shortcut, nothing new. I'd taken that path hundreds of times, always with the feeling that my mother, at home, would be praying that I wouldn't, and that my sister, if she knew, would be sending some silly voice message just to fake company. That night, I really did walk alone. I just wanted to get home, take off my sneakers, drink some hot tea, and sleep without thinking about the charts I'd left on my desk. That's when I heard it. A low moan, muffled, almost mistaken for the wind curling between the alley walls. I stopped. I put my hand on my bag strap by reflex and stood still, listening. The alley smelled of wet garbage and the cold grease from the fryers of the restaurant that backed onto that street. Another sound, fainter this time. It came from the corner where the light didn't quite reach, behind a rusted dumpster. The sensible part of me told me to keep walking, told me to think about Maribel, about Elowen, about the morning shift, told me to remember that this kind of alley, at this hour, with that dirty snow, was no place for a curious woman. But I had heard a moan, and anyone who hears a moan and pretends they didn't becomes the person I never wanted to be. I walked slowly. My feet stumbled over something that felt like a piece of pipe, and that's when I saw the shadow of a man slumped against the brick wall, his head fallen to one side, and his legs stretched out on the ground as if he'd given up trying to get up. His jacket was open, underneath. His dark shirt gleamed in a way I had already learned to recognize even in the dark. Blood. I knelt without thinking. The freezing concrete cut through the thin fabric of my pants in an immediate, aggressive cold, and for a moment, my body locked up. His breathing was short, wheezing. I caught the sweet iron of the blood mixed with a trace of liquor spilled on his jacket, probably from the night itself. I pulled the shirt aside slowly, and only then, seeing the clean tear along the side of his flank, did I understand it wasn't a street fight. It was a gunshot. "Sir," I called softly. "Sir, can you hear me?" His eyes opened to a sliver. It was the first time I saw that blue, even darkened by pain, even lost. He found me, and instead of asking for help, he whispered, "Get out of here." The voice came out hoarse, rough, with an accent hard to place, something older than him. I'd heard voices like that before in hospital corridors, always accompanied by men standing at the door whom no one dared to question. "I'm a nurse," I answered, opening my bag in search of a glove, gauze, anything. "Let me look." "They'll come back." "Who?" He didn't answer. He tried to push my hand away and failed. That's when my palm touched his flank and I felt how soaked he was. The bullet had grazed him. I saw it the moment I pulled the shirt aside. The wound was long, dirty, still actively bleeding, the edges purpled by the cold. Not fatal in itself, but like that, in the cold, with that much blood loss, it would be. I pulled the red scarf from my neck without thinking twice. I folded it and pressed it hard against the wound. He moaned low, and his hand shot up suddenly, gripping my wrist with a strength that knocked the air out of me. "Get out of here," he repeated, and the grip wasn't a threat. It was a warning. "No," that was all I managed to say. I felt my fingers tremble beneath his, but I kept them there, firm against the scarf, against his blood. He looked at me again, and I saw the calculation pass behind that initial fever. He was measuring me. I didn't look away. "I already lost my father because no one came to help," I said, and heard my voice come out steadier than I expected. I'm not going to let another man die on the ground. Something in his face changed. It wasn't surrender. It was recognition, maybe, as if he'd written that line down to keep in a place he could never take it from again. That's when I noticed the chain. It slipped out from inside the torn shirt, thin, of matte gold, with a single letter hanging at the center, K. His free hand rose and covered the piece with a gesture so protective that I understood, in that same second, that it was worth more than his life, and I understood something else. Something that made me swallow hard and keep pressing the scarf as if nothing had happened. That man was not just any man. "Can you walk?" I asked, pretending I hadn't seen. "I can." "Liar." A corner of his mouth moved. It didn't quite become a smile. It was almost worse, because I saw his intelligence wake up behind the pain, and that scared me more than the blood. "My car's just around the corner," I continued. "I'll help you. But you don't let go of that chain. You don't let go of the scarf, and you don't close your eyes. Deal. Why are you doing this?" "Because somebody has to." I stood up. I draped his arm over my shoulders, and he leaned on me with a weight that nearly knocked me down. He was a big man, taller than I'd calculated from my knees. We walked like two drunks, him dragging his leg, me holding the scarf against his flank, my feet slipping in the dirty snow. Every yard was a negotiation with my own body. I felt the feverish heat radiating from him even through the fabric, and that worried me more than anything else that night. When I finally opened the door of my old car and shoved him into the passenger seat, he was gray. I started the engine with a trembling hand. The heater took its time responding, first blowing cold air that didn't help at all. I pulled out of that alley praying no one was watching me from the dark windows of the surrounding buildings, though something inside me already knew someone was. I drove through the back roads. I didn't go near the police station. I didn't go near the hospital. Each decision was a small crime against everything I'd been trained to do, and even so I kept going. Maribel opened the door in her nightgown, rosary in hand. "Sweetheart, for the love of God." "What?" "Mom, hot water. Now, and get my sewing kit." Alawan appeared in the hallway, barefoot, her hair pulled back any old way, her eyes widening slowly as she understood. "Josephine, this guy is alive. I want him alive. Help me." My sister, who was impulsive about everything in life, that night obeyed without arguing. We pushed the living room couch into the middle, spread out towels, and I laid that huge stranger down on the cleanest thing we had in the house. His jacket left dark marks on the upholstery. I didn't care. Maribel prayed under her breath while she boiled the water, her voice almost inaudible beneath the noise of the kettle. Elowen held the focus of her phone's flashlight with both hands so she wouldn't shake. I cut his shirt with the surgical scissors I always kept at the bottom of my bag, and the whole wound came into view. Long, deep on one side, shallow on the other, with ragged edges that had begun to swell from the cold. I cleaned it with saline, then with antiseptic, and watched him clench his teeth without making a sound. "It's going to hurt more," I warned. "Do it." I sutured it right there, in the living room, with the thread I used for home emergencies whenever Elowen got herself hurt in the kitchen. My fingers knew what to do, even while the rest of me screamed to stop. He watched me in silence, eyes open, breathing controlled. He didn't look away for a single second. I felt that gaze weigh on my hands as if he were noting down every stitch I made. "Why didn't you run?" he asked when I was halfway through the work. I already answered that. Answer again. I looked up for a moment. I met his eyes, because I already know what it's like to arrive too late. He closed his eyes for a second. It wasn't exhaustion. It was something else. Something I couldn't name at that hour, and that would cost me many nights afterward. When I finished, I took a clean cloth and began washing the blood from his face. My fingers ran over his forehead, along the side of his jaw, over the arch of his eyebrow where there was an older cut, already scarred, older than the gunshot. The water in the basin turned red faster than I expected. He let me work. He said nothing. And I, in that dense silence that filled the entire room, began to notice things I shouldn't have been noticing. The quality of the fabric of the torn shirt, the weight of the watch on his wrist, the way Maribel stopped praying when she saw the chain with the initial K, the way Elowen, who always had a joke on the tip of her tongue, hadn't opened her mouth in almost an hour. He was not just any man. And I, kneeling beside the couch in my living room, my hands stained and the red scarf thrown on the floor, realized for the first time that maybe I'd saved someone I shouldn't have saved. Maribel touched my shoulder lightly. "Sweetheart," she whispered. "Who is this man?" I opened my mouth to answer and couldn't. I looked at him. He was looking back at me, lucid enough to follow the question, quiet enough to leave the answer up to me. "He's my patient," I said, at last. It was the best I could do. Maribel squeezed my shoulder and went back to the kitchen without comment. Alawan turned off her phone flashlight. I stayed there, sitting on the cold floor, my back against the couch and the smell of antiseptic soaked into my hands, counting my own heartbeats to be able to breathe. He had fallen asleep, or into what passes for sleep when the body surrenders control. His breathing was steadier, deeper. The chain with the K stayed clutched in his hand, even asleep, as if his fingers refused to let go even without the consciousness to command it. Distant, but unmistakable. The sound of tires slowing on a street that had no traffic at that hour. A car, then another, then one more, heavier, slower, with the deep vibration of an expensive engine gliding slowly over the dirty, snow-covered asphalt. I stood up without making a sound. I reached the living room window and pulled the curtain back 2 fingers. Width. The street was beginning to lighten into a dull gray that barely deserved the name of dawn, the weak light tinting the snow a dirty, colorless shade. And, at the end of the block, a pair of headlights went dark, then another, then a third. Behind me, in the living room, the man I had saved opened his eyes. Chapter 2. 300 Knees on the Ground. I didn't take my hand off the curtain for a stretch of time that felt longer than it was. The street filled up slowly, unhurried, without noise, as if every driver knew exactly where to stop and why. I counted 6 cars before I lost count. Then pickup trucks appeared, then a larger sedan, then men stepping out in silence, all in black, all synchronized in a way that made me think of shifts in the ICU when everyone moved without needing to speak. "What time is it?" His voice came from behind me, steadier than I'd expected for someone who'd bled all night. I looked at the clock on the shelf. 7:10. "How many?" I swallowed hard. "I don't know. A lot." He tried to get up. I turned at once. "You just got shot. Sit down. You're not asking. You're ordering." "I am." His left eyebrow rose 0.5 centimeter. It was almost an expression. It was almost humor. Even so, he obeyed. He pushed his body up until he was sitting on the couch with the torn shirt sliding off one shoulder, the chain with the K swinging at his chest, and the well-sutured wound darkening the dressing just enough to worry me. Maribel appeared in the kitchen doorway with the rosary wrapped around her wrist and her eyes wide. "Sweetheart, there are men out there." "I know, Mom. There are a lot of men out there." "I know." Alawan appeared behind her, still barefoot, and went straight to the sink. She came back holding the cast-iron skillet with both hands, the way you hold a tennis racket when you intend to use it as an axe. "If any of those guys crosses the threshold, I'm going down," she said, not looking at anyone in particular. The man on the couch let out a short sound through his nose, almost a laugh. I turned to him. "Who are they?" He looked at me. "Mine." The word dropped into the room like a stone into a well. Maribel began to pray under her breath, the way she did when she didn't know what else to do. Alawan tightened her grip on the skillet handle. I stood in the middle of the room, my hand on the window frame, and realized for the first time that I had stepped, without asking permission, into a place I would not leave the way I'd entered it. "I'm going out there," I said. 3 pairs of eyes found me at the same time. "You're not," he said. "I am. It's my house. They came because I brought you. I'll handle it. It doesn't work that way. Today it does." I grabbed the coat thrown over the chair and opened the front door before anyone could reach me. The freezing air hit my face, as if the world outside had been waiting to greet me. I stepped onto the porch with both hands shoved in my pockets to hide that they were trembling, and I looked. There were many. Black suits lined up on both sides of the street, broad shoulders, hands visible, no weapons showing, in a silent discipline that made the silence hurt. I tried to count 1 quadrant and gave up at the 20th. They were out front, diagonally across, at the end of the block, on the corner, and they continued beyond what my window showed. More than I'd ever seen gathered in one place outside of a church on a day of mourning. One man broke from the line. He walked up to the foot of the porch, lean, tall, with gray hair cut short, eyes that seemed to be doing calculations without stopping. He stopped at the level of the bottom step and lifted his chin. "Are you the Kerrigan girl?" The voice was low, polished, with no apparent threat. It was the kind of voice that scared you more than shouting. "I am. My name is Declan Brennan. I work for the man inside your house." I swallowed. "All right." "He's alive." "I know." The way he said, "I know," gave me chills more than anything until then. as if he'd known for hours, as if the whole time, while I sutured in the living room, someone had been telling Declan Brennan that the boss was breathing. That's when the door behind me opened. His steps were slow. His hand leaned against the frame. I turned at once, ready to push him back inside, but the expression on his face stopped me. He had put on his jacket. The chain with the K was tucked inside again. The blue eyes swept the street with a calculation that had nothing to do with surprise and everything to do with confirmation. And that's when it happened. All of them, at the same time, bent their right knee. There were many, more than I had managed to count from the porch, rows and rows running down the street as far as the eye could reach. Not before me, before him. The sound of knees on the snow-covered asphalt was a single muffled thud, synchronized, almost rehearsed. The heads bowed, the shoulders stilled. The whole street turned into an aisle of respect. I couldn't breathe. Maribel, behind the door, let out a quiet, "Jesus." Elowen, still holding the skillet, opened her mouth and closed it again without being able to get anything out. Declan Brennan lifted his eyes to the man on the upper step. "Bah, boss." The word was said with a respect I'd never heard with that density. "Boss. Not chief. Not sir. Boss. How long?" His voice came out firm, though I knew the effort that firmness was costing. It took us a while to triangulate the signal. The chain went off its usual route near the alley. Only at dawn were we able to confirm the position. And what happened in the alley? We're looking into it. There was a silence. The 300 knees didn't move. He, the man I still called only him inside my head, ran his hand over the chain by reflex. His fingers found a small bulge sewn inside the pendant, something I'd felt during the suturing and hadn't understood. From the way Declan spoke of triangulating the signal, I understood it then. That's how his men had found him. He turned his head and looked at me. It wasn't a look of relief. It was a look of a problem, as if I had transformed, overnight, into something he hadn't yet decided how to keep. "On your feet," he said to the street. The 300 rose together. "Brennan," he continued, "I want the house emptied. The 3 of them with me. Armored car, double escort, route to the lake house. We leave in 15 minutes. Boss," I interrupted. Before thinking, the word came out wrong in my mouth, because I didn't want to call him that. But it was what I'd been hearing for the past hour, and his name I still had no authorization to use. He turned. "Kavanagh," he corrected. "Low. Just for me. Connor Kavanagh. Since you sutured my flank, I suppose you've earned the surname." I felt my face heat in a way I hated. "I'm not going." He looked at me in silence. "I'm not going," I repeated. "This is my house. This is my family. I have nothing to do with any mansion." It wasn't a question. I didn't ask one either. Declan Brennan lowered his eyes to the discreet notebook he'd taken from his pocket and pretended to write something. The men in the street didn't move. Maribel, behind the door, clutched the rosary with both hands. Connor came down the step until he was exactly 1 stair below me. It was the first time I'd been close to him with him standing, and I realized how tall he was, how much space he took up, how his presence transformed the porch of my simple house into another place. "Josephine," he said, low, "you pressed a red scarf against a gunshot wound in a Cleveland alley. You took a stranger into your living room. You sutured a man with a chain bearing a K around his neck. By now, somewhere in this city, someone already knows." My mouth went dry. "And if someone already knows," he continued, "your mother doesn't sleep at home tonight." I looked at Maribel. I looked at Elowen, still with the skillet, now resting against her thigh, as if she'd forgotten why she was holding it. "How long?" I asked. "As long as it takes." That's a politician's answer. It's a boss's answer. There was a pause. He held out his hand, palm up, in the middle of the porch. It wasn't a polite request. It was a warning that the time for arguing was over. I didn't take his hand, but I walked past it, went into the house, grabbed Maribel's bag, grabbed Elowen's coat, grabbed the Bible my mother kept on the side table, and piled it all into her arms. "We're going, sweetheart. We're going, Mom. I'll explain later." Elowen looked at me with an expression that swung between dread and the unbearable curiosity that had always defined her. She set the skillet down on the sink, thought better of it, picked it back up, took it along. Maribel went up to her room and took the length of a whole prayer. She came down with a small suitcase, the Bible on top of the folded clothes, and the rosary wrapped around her wrist. Elowen tossed what would fit into a cloth bag. I grabbed the sewing kit, 2 changes of clothes, the folded scrubs. The men outside didn't come in. They waited on the porch, in silence, as if respecting the time it took us to tear the house out of ourselves. When I passed through the door, I looked back once. The living room still had the couch out of place and the stained towels on the floor. I closed the door without locking it. It no longer made a difference. 15 minutes later, I was sitting in the back seat of an armored car, shoulder to shoulder with Connor Kavanagh, Maribel on my left, and Alowan clutching the skillet like a child. The windows were so dark they barely gave any hint that it was morning. The driver didn't speak. Declan Brennan rode in the front car. 2 other cars surrounded us, and behind came a whole line that I didn't have the courage to measure in the rearview mirror. Connor looked straight ahead, jaw locked, the dressing hidden by his jacket, his breathing still shorter than he wanted to let show. I stayed silent for 10 whole minutes, counting the neighborhoods we left behind, until curiosity beat pride. Do you always kidnap the people who save you? He turned slowly. I've never been saved before. I didn't know what to say. I looked straight ahead. I rested my hands in my lap to hide that they were still trembling. I felt the warmth of his shoulder touching mine for a second, and I pulled away 2 fingers, width, pretending it was the curve of the road. Maribel prayed. Alowan looked out the window. The car left the city behind and turned onto a road where the pines began to appear taller than the lampposts. The gray sky lightened to a paler gray, without ever turning blue. When the gate appeared, I swallowed hard. It was tall. It was iron. It had 2 cameras swiveling in opposite directions, and 4 men standing in positions that suggested another 8 were where I couldn't see them. Behind the gate, the road continued a good while longer among the trees, and only then did the house appear, outlined against the pale sky over Lake Erie. It wasn't a house. It was a mansion. Pale stone, 3 floors, tall windows, a dark wood porch facing the water that appeared just behind, still partly frozen at the edges. The car stopped at the covered entrance. Declan Brennan opened the door before the driver got out. Maribel got out first, then Alowan, the skillet still in her hands. I hesitated. Connor got out the other side and came around the car to my door. He offered his hand again. This time, I looked at my fingers stained with dried blood that I hadn't had time to wash properly, looked at his open palm, and got out on my own. He didn't withdraw his hand right away. He left it hanging in the air a second longer than he needed to. Then he closed it. I climbed the 3 steps to the foot of the entrance stairs. The double doors of the mansion opened before any of us touched the handle. Inside, the entryway opened into a high ceiling, the chandelier dark, the floor gleaming, a thick silence that seemed to swallow even the sound of our own footsteps. Maribel crossed herself. Alowan whispered a curse. I stood still on the threshold. Connor passed me, stopped a step ahead, and looked back over his shoulder. Welcome. The word hung suspended between us. It wasn't hospitality. It was a contract. It was a warning. It was the confirmation, in a single syllable, that I had crossed a border that didn't exist on any map, and that the way back, if it existed, would not be through the same gate. I took the first step inside. Chapter 3. The Rules of the Lake House. The mansion woke before I did. I opened my eyes in the second-floor guest room, and the sound that brought me to consciousness wasn't birds, nor water lapping at the dock. It was firm footsteps in the hallway, on the other side of the door, heavy boots, 3 men, maybe 4, walking like people who already knew by heart every board that creaked. I stayed still under the comforter, my breath held, waiting for them to pass. The first thing I did was go to the window. Lake Erie was gray in that early morning, small waves breaking against the stone of the dock, and 3 men in black suits smoked leaning against a car down below. None of them looked up, but I knew they knew exactly which room I was in. I took my time choosing what to wear. They'd left a whole dresser of new clothes in the room. Silk, cashmere, labels I'd never seen outside of a magazine. I pushed it all to the back and grabbed the jeans I'd brought myself, the gray cotton blouse, the worn-out sneakers. If that house expected to turn me into something else, it was going to have to wait a long time. I found Maribel in the kitchen, already with the new rosary between her fingers. Someone had placed a dark wood rosary next to her cup during the night, a detail that tightened my chest without my quite knowing why. It wasn't her rosary. It was the rosary of someone who understood what she would need to get through that week. Connor had ordered it left there. "Good morning, Mom. Sweetheart." She lifted her eyes. "Did you sleep?" I slept. It was a lie. Maribel knew, but she didn't press. She just poured me coffee into a porcelain cup. I drank it. It was too good, and that bothered me too. Elowen appeared in the doorway, barefoot, her hair sticking up every which way. "There are waffles," she announced. "I don't know if I'm under house arrest or in a hotel, but there are real waffles. Elowen? Joe, I'm trying to keep morale up. Let me." She walked past me and hugged Maribel from behind, resting her chin on our mother's shoulder. Maribel sighed with that sigh only a mother knows, half prayer, half reproach, half gratitude. I looked at the two of them and felt a tightness I couldn't name. It was the first morning when no one had to rush off anywhere. There was no shift waiting for me. There was no overdue bill stuck to the fridge, and the kitchen smelled of melted butter. But the price of that was standing in some room upstairs, dressed in black, waiting to call for me. "Miss Kerrigan." I looked up. Finn Doyle was leaning against the doorframe, his hands crossed in front of his body. He had a fresh cut at the corner of his mouth, the mark of some previous night that no one there would explain. He smiled with the corner that still obeyed. "Mr. Kavanagh asks that you go up to the study when you've finished your coffee. Asks or orders. Asks." He tilted his head slightly. I'd have ordered it differently. Elowen let out a short laugh behind me. "Do you always talk like that?" She leaned her elbows on the counter, staring at Finn. "Like movie subtitles. Always," he answered, without moving a muscle of his face. "We're going to get along." "I fear so, miss." Maribel closed her eyes for a second. I swallowed my smile because I didn't want to set that precedent. But Finn had already looked away and was watching me again, waiting. I drank the rest of the coffee. I set the cup in the sink. I straightened my blouse. "I'm going." Connor's study was on the second floor, at the end of the east corridor. Double doors of dark wood, bronze handles, always closed. Finn stopped 2 steps behind me, knocked once, and opened without waiting for an answer. I went in. The first thing I saw wasn't him. It was the books. An entire wall, floor to ceiling, full of old spines. In 3 languages I recognized and 2 I didn't. It smelled of old paper and waxed wood. There was a heavy desk near the window and, behind it, standing, with his hands in the pockets of his black trousers and his white shirt rolled up to the elbow. Connor Kavanagh was waiting for me. He'd changed the dressing. I could tell by the bulk under his shirt. On the left flank, he'd changed it without calling me, and that offended me in a way I couldn't justify in that second. "Sit." "No, thank you." He raised an eyebrow. He didn't insist. He came around the desk slowly, without taking his hands from his pockets, and stopped 3 steps from me. "I'm going to ask you some questions." "Ask them." "Who sent you down that alley last night?" "My shift ended at 11. The alley is a shortcut to the staff parking lot. I've taken that route for 4 years. 4 years. 4 years. He looked at me. I looked back. I'd learned not to look away from a patient in cardiac arrest. No man in his study was going to make me lower my gaze. "Who knew about your shift yesterday?" "My head nurse. The schedule is posted on the board. Anyone in the hospital knew." "How much did they pay you?" The question came without warning. I blinked once. "Mr. Kavanagh." "Connor." "Mr. Kavanagh," I repeated, firmer. "And I work 2 extra shifts a week at a public hospital to pay the electric bill on time. I support 3 people. If someone had offered me money to let a man die in an alley, maybe it would have been cheaper for everyone. But no one offered. And even if they had, I wouldn't take it, because the only thing I've carried with me since I was 15 is the scene of my father on the kitchen floor waiting for an ambulance that never came. So you can ask in another way, because with this way, your answer is already there." Connor didn't move for about 3 seconds. Then he breathed in deeply, slowly, and when he spoke again his voice had changed temperature. "Sit, Josephine." I sat, not because he ordered me to, because my legs decided they'd worked enough. He pulled out the other armchair, sat across from me, knees almost touching mine. He took his hands from his pockets for the first time. They were big hands, full of small scars I hadn't seen the night before because of the blood. "I have to ask these questions," he said, low. "It's not about you. It's about the world I live in. I understood that. Did you really understand it? I understood that you don't trust anyone. I learned a few things early too, Mr. Kavanagh. The difference is, I don't have 300 men outside to confirm I'm right." He held my gaze. For an instant, I saw something crack behind those eyes. Not much. Not enough for him to let me see everything, but enough for me to know it had cracked. Then he composed himself. "One more question. Ask it. Why didn't you leave?" I took my time answering. I looked at the wall of books, then at his hands, then at his eyes again, because I already left once. I swallowed. When my father collapsed, I ran into the street to ask for help. I knocked on 3 doors. No one opened. When I came back, He was no longer breathing. I was 12 years old. It took me years to understand it wasn't my fault, but I was never again able to pass by a closed door without knocking. That's it. You're the closed door. I knocked. Connor stayed silent. He leaned back a little, resting the nape of his neck against the back of the armchair, and looked at me like someone who needed to memorize me whole before saying anything. When he spoke, it was almost a whisper. You shouldn't have knocked. I know. No, Josephine. His voice dropped one more tone. You shouldn't have knocked, but I'm glad you knocked. I didn't know what to answer, so I didn't answer. The following days found a rhythm I hadn't expected. I refused the master suite on the 3rd floor. I refused the woman they would bring me to organize clothes. I asked for a kitchen apron and a decent knife. The housekeeper looked at me as if I'd asked to use the bathtub to boil sausage, and then, without saying anything, left the apron folded on my bed the next morning. I cooked because it was the only thing in that house that still obeyed my hands the way it obeyed in Cleveland. Maribel prayed the new rosary on the lake porch in the late afternoon, and, after 2 days, I discovered she'd started praying a specific decade for Connor, without telling me. I just brought her tea once, without asking anything. Eloan, in her Eloan way, decided to adopt Finn as a personal project. Finn, do you sleep? Miss? No, seriously. I wake up at night, you're in the hallway. I come down in the morning, you're in the living room. Are you a hologram? A ghost uncle? I sleep, miss. Where? Standing up. She cracked up laughing. Finn didn't smile, but there was a muscle at the corner of his mouth that moved in a way I'd never seen before. Maribel crossed herself 3 times that night, without explaining to anyone why. Connor I saw in fragments. In the morning, passing through the hallway with Declan at his side, speaking quietly about things that stopped being said when they saw me. At night, in the library, alone. That's where I found him on the 3rd night. I'd come down with the excuse of getting a glass of milk. There was milk upstairs, but I didn't want to admit I'd come down looking for him. The library door was ajar, and the light of a single lamp yellowed the rug. He was sitting in a leather armchair with a book open over his knee. But he wasn't reading. He was looking at the fire. Don't you sleep? He lifted his eyes. He didn't seem surprised. Little. Since when? Since I was 19. I took 1 step farther in. He'd taken off the chain. His neck, without the gold, looked more naked than if he'd taken off his shirt. May I? I pointed to the opposite armchair. You may. I sat. The fire crackled low. For about 2 minutes, neither of us spoke. You cooked today, he said, low. I cooked. Mrs. Halloran told me you wouldn't let her touch the pot. I don't trust anyone who sautés onions in a hurry. He laughed. It was the first time I'd heard him laugh. It came out short, low, surprised at itself, like someone who hadn't done that in too long and hadn't expected the sound to come out. I looked at the fire again so as not to look at him laughing. Josephine. Thank you. For the scarf. I didn't answer. I had no answer to give. That was the moment she appeared in the doorway. Mora. Finn had mentioned in passing, on the 2nd day, that Mrs. Mora was in Chicago. Earlier, after dinner, he'd appeared in the hallway just to say she'd arrived without warning. There she was now, leaning against the jamb, barefoot, in a cream silk robe. Dark blonde hair fell loose to her shoulders, and her mouth was thin, the kind that smiles before the rest of the face decides whether it wants to smile too. Connor, darling. The voice of someone who entered rooms without knocking. You didn't tell me we had a guest. Mora. I'm Mora. She came in. She held out her hand to me, but didn't quite open it for real. Connor didn't tell you about me. He didn't need to. How about that? She sat on the arm of his chair, without asking, and I saw Connor stiffen in an almost imperceptible way. So you're the nurse. The one from the alley. I am. What a terrible night you had. The smile grew 0.5 millimeter. And how quickly you've settled in. You already know where the library is. The kitchen. It took me months. I ask. I imagine. She ran her hand slowly over the back of Connor's chair. Not over his body, over the chair, but close enough for me to get the message. Connor didn't move. He looked at me. I looked at Mora. Mora smiled as if we were about to trade recipes. I'm going up, I said. I stood. Good night. Good night, dear. Josephine. I stopped in the doorway, my hand on the frame. I looked back. Connor had stood up, the book closed in his hand. I'll walk you. Mora didn't move from the chair, but her smile had frozen 0.5 centimeter. I climbed the stairs with Connor 1 step behind me. On the 2nd floor landing, before the east corridor, he stopped. I stopped. His hand came to my elbow. It didn't close, just rested there, and I felt the warmth of his fingers through the thin fabric of my blouse. She won't bother you. She already did. I'll take care of it. You don't have to. Yes, I do. I looked at him. He was too close. His mouth, speaking low like that, was a hand's width from mine. For just a second, I thought he was going to lean in. And I thought too, with an honesty that scared me, that I wouldn't pull back if he did. But Declan appeared at the end of the corridor. Connor, port 5. His hand left my elbow. He took a step back. Good night, Josephine. Good night. I went into the room and closed the door without making a sound. I rested my forehead against the wood for a length of time I couldn't measure. When I finally turned and looked at the room, I saw what had been bothering me all day. The perfume bottle I'd brought from Cleveland was on the other side of the dresser. The lamp was turned slightly outward. The book I'd left on the bed was on the nightstand. Someone had come into my room while I was in the library, and it hadn't been to make the bed. Chapter 4. Fever, a Kiss, and the Camera That Lied. I woke at 3 a.m. with a certainty in my chest that I couldn't explain the source of. I sat up in bed, barefoot, and stayed still for a moment listening to the house. There was the wind tapping against a poorly closed window on the ground floor. There was the hum of the heating in the baseboard. And, deeper, at the end of the east corridor, there was a light on. I knew there was, because the yellow strip under my door trembled slightly, and that only happened when his study lamp was on. I shouldn't have gone, but I went. I put a cardigan on over my nightgown, barefoot so as not to wake Maribel, and went down the corridor with my hand lightly on the wall. The carpet absorbed my steps. When I reached the study door, I found Finn sitting on the hallway bench, his head leaning against the wall, eyes half closed. Miss, is he in there? Finn looked at the door. He looked back at me. He is, but I don't know if I should let you in. How is he? Stubborn. Worse than that. Finn. He looked at me one more second. Then he stood, took 2 steps, opened the door without knocking. He pulled it to again behind me. The first thing I saw was the white shirt over the back of the chair. The second was Connor, without the shirt, slumped in the armchair, his head fallen back and the dressing on his flank dark, soaked with something that was no longer just blood. I didn't need to touch him to know. I already knew by the smell. Mr. Kavanagh. He opened his eyes with effort. The 2 stitches of my suture were still there. I saw when I approached and lifted the edge of the gauze. They'd held, but the skin around it was red, shiny, too hot when I touched the backs of my fingers to it. You have a fever. I'm fine. You have a fever, Connor. It was the first time I called him by his first name. It came out the way it does with a patient who needs to understand that he stopped being in charge of the conversation. He noticed. He didn't answer. Where's the kit? What kit? The first aid kit. You did your own dressing today. I saw it. Where is it? He pointed his chin at the bottom drawer of the desk. I opened it. Saline. Gauze. Antiseptic. Surgical thread of a quality far too good to have been bought at an ordinary pharmacy. I took out what I'd need. I pulled the reading chair close to him. Sit up straight. I am sitting. Sit up straight, Connor. He straightened. I worked in silence. I removed the old dressing, cleaned it with saline until the pus that had begun to form at the lower edge came away. The suture had held, but the surrounding tissue was strained. He'd done physical exertion at some point in the last 24 hours, something a man with a graze wound to his flank shouldn't have done. I worked without comment. He didn't take his eyes off my face. Who touches this wound without you complaining? He took his time answering. Myself. A pause. For 20 years. Do you stay standing while I treat you, or do you sit? I sit. Do you complain or keep quiet? I keep quiet. Do you trust whoever treats you? He didn't answer right away. I finished applying the antiseptic. I lifted my eyes. His face was much closer to mine than I'd registered while working. Connor. Do you trust whoever treats you? No. Why? Because nobody, he swallowed, touches a wound of mine without wanting something in return. I stayed still with the gauze in my hand. I felt the warmth of his breath on my forehead. The whole house seemed to have gone silent all at once, as if even the baseboard heating had stopped to listen. I'm not asking for anything, I said. I know. Then stay quiet, and let me finish. I finished. I cut the new gauze, taped it at the edges, gathered the used compresses in silence. He kept looking at me the whole time. When I went to move away, he held my wrist. Not hard, not like someone giving an order, like someone who needed one more second before the second ran out. Josephine. Sit. I sat. in the armchair beside him, not his. He leaned toward me. His dark hair fell over his sweat-damp forehead. The blue eyes, I'd never had the courage to look at them calmly. At length, until that moment, were darker with fever. He raised his hand slowly and lightly touched the corner of my mouth with his thumb. He didn't kiss me. He just touched, like someone wanting to check that I was real. "You're the first person in 20 years, he said, very low, "who came into this study in the middle of the night and didn't ask for anything." I asked, "What?" "That you sit up straight." He laughed. Short, low, ill. And it was in that short laugh, not in the touch, not in the words, that I leaned in. I pressed my mouth to his. The kiss was slow. It was the kiss of someone still afraid of breaking the suture, still afraid of breaking the man. He rested his other hand on my face and held it there, without pressing, as if I might vanish if he pressed. I tasted the fever on his mouth, and even so I didn't pull away. When I finally drew back, it was only by a few centimeters. His forehead fell against mine. "Go to sleep, Connor." "I can't." "Go to sleep." I stood up. He held my wrist again. "Lighter now. Don't leave. I'm only going to my room." "You're either sleeping here in the armchair, or I help you to your room." "Room," I called Finn. The two of them together carried Connor down the corridor, and I followed behind, carrying the kit. I laid him in bed, covered him, left the upper window ajar for the air to circulate. When I left, Finn stayed in the chair across from the door, and the last thing I saw was Connor already sleeping with his mouth open, the way someone sleeps only when the body has given up pretending. I went back to my room. I stayed awake until the sun rose. The morning came with Declan in the monitoring room. I went down to make coffee, not because anyone had called me, but because I needed to keep my hands busy. Maribel was already in the kitchen, and I could tell by her eyes that she'd understood everything just from looking at my face. She didn't comment. She only squeezed my hand when I passed her cup to her. That's when Finn came in. His face was closed. "Miss, did he get worse?" "No." A pause. "It's something else." I went up behind him. The monitoring room was at the end of the west corridor. I'd never been in there before. There were 4 large screens showing the outer grounds, 2 smaller screens showing the lake and the access road. Connor was already there, standing, still pale from the fever, but with his shirt buttoned and the chain back around his neck. Declan was beside him with a laptop open. Maura was in the corner, hands crossed in front of her robe, the same cream robe from the night before. "Good morning," I said. No one answered. Connor looked at me for a second that lasted too long. "Josephine." Declan turned the laptop. "I need you to see something." I approached. He hit play. It was the East Corridor camera, 2nd floor, middle of the night. The timestamp in the corner read 2:53 a.m. I saw myself leave my room. I saw myself walk to the study. But, before going in, the woman on the screen, stopped in the corridor, took a phone from the pocket of my cardigan, typed for about 7 seconds, put the phone away, and only then went in. I hadn't taken out any phone. I hadn't even brought mine into the room that night. I'd left it charging on the ground floor. That didn't happen. "Miss Declan, that didn't happen. I didn't have a phone." Connor said nothing. He looked at the screen. His face had closed in a way I'd never seen, not even the first night in the alley. It wasn't anger. It was calculation. It was the man who had inherited 300 knees at 19, returning into him at a speed that terrified me. Maura took a step forward. "Connor, darling, I know how difficult this is, but there was an attack tonight at Port 5. 2 of our men." She paused, controlling a voice that seemed to tremble. "The information went out from here. I saw the call in the internal log myself. 3:17 a.m., East Corridor Extension. I'm not accusing anyone. I'm just asking that we look at the facts. I didn't leak anything." "I know, dear." Maura smiled. "But the camera saw. The camera lied." Connor looked at me. For a second I saw in that look everything he'd told me in the middle of the night, the nobody touches my wounds without wanting something in return. And I saw the man doubting again what he'd confessed hours earlier. He didn't doubt with his mouth. He doubted with his eyes. It was worse. "Get out," he said, low. "Everyone, except Josephine." The room emptied. Maura took longer than the others. Finn closed the door. "Connor, who did you call?" "I didn't call anyone." "Josephine, I didn't call anyone." "Connor, I left my phone charging in the kitchen since dinner. Anyone in this house can confirm it." He walked to the screen. He rewound the video. He paused on the frame where the woman, me, took the phone from her pocket. He zoomed in. The face on the screen was my face. The cardigan was my cardigan. The hair was my hair. And that's when I saw it. "Connor, no." Connor, look here. I pointed. He looked. My mother's ring. I held out my right hand to him. I've worn it on my middle finger since I was 12 years old. Maribel gave it to me when my father died. I don't take it off to sleep. I don't take it off to work. Look at the screen. The woman on the screen had no ring at all. Connor looked. He looked again. He rewound the video 2 frames. Advance 3. Froze. For a second that was too long. He said nothing. It wasn't doubt. It was the cold machinery of a man who had already decided to believe me a few hours earlier, and now needed to understand at what point in his own house they'd managed to fool him. When he spoke, his voice came out too low. Who else had access to the monitoring room last night? Declan answered from outside the door before I even turned. Mrs. Mora, sir, for 42 minutes. Connor closed his eyes. It wasn't relief. It was the confirmation of something he'd already known for longer than I'd understood. Finn opened the door before Connor even finished calling. Bring Mora. The main room received 7 men. Declan, Finn, 3 captains whose names I still didn't know, an older man who must have been the head of camera security, and Mora, pushed with cold gentleness into the room, still in her robe. Connor stood beside the dark fireplace. He didn't look at me. I stood near the door, not because he'd called me, but because I wasn't going to leave that room before the answer. Mora. Connor. The recording was edited. I don't know what you're talking about. The woman in the recording doesn't have the ring Josephine wears. Josephine didn't take off the ring at any moment in the last 4 days. The cameraman is going to tell me now whether the original recording was edited. The older man swallowed. He looked at Mora once. He looked at Connor once. He didn't speak. Murphy, Connor said, low. I've known you for 18 years. Your wife works in the kitchen of this house. You're going to look me in the eye and tell me whether that recording came clean off the server. Murphy opened his mouth, closed it. His shoulders dropped 2 centimeters before the answer. It was edited, sir. Mrs. Mora asked me to cut 2 seconds and splice in an overlay from another night. She said it was your order. I didn't confirm it. I should have confirmed it. Mora laughed. It was a low, thin, utterly mirthless laugh. The laugh of someone who still thought she had a way out. Connor, darling, this is absurd. Mora, I raised you. I sat beside you when your father died. Mora, his voice dropped. It didn't rise. It dropped, and it was worse. I gave you the Chicago house. I gave you the family name without you having to ask. I gave you everything you asked for. I never asked you for anything. I asked you for one thing. He took 3 steps toward her. That you not touch what was mine. Mora looked at me over his shoulder. For a fraction of a second, I saw in her eyes what she'd been during the whole 4 days. I saw the old jealousy. I saw the ambition. I saw the certainty that her place in his life had been stolen by a public hospital nurse who'd come into the house in worn-out sneakers and a gray blouse. She's a stranger, Mora whispered. Connor, she's a stranger. I grew up in this house. I buried your father at your side. Are you going to trade me for a public hospital nurse who showed up a week ago? Yes. The word came out smooth. Mora blinked once. That's when I saw, for the first time, the full hatred in her eyes. Not the jealousy from before, but the promise of someone who knew she'd have time to repay it. You're going to regret this, she said, low. Both of you. Declan. Sir, get Mora out of the house. Today. No injuries. No word. I don't want to know where to. I don't want to know with whom. When I need to know, I'll ask. Sir, they took Mora. She didn't cry. She only looked at me, one more time, before leaving, and I saw in her eyes something I couldn't name until much later, something that wasn't hatred alone. It was hatred with a promise. The room emptied little by little. Only Connor and I were left. He turned to me. The white shirt had a small stain at flank height. The wound had bled slightly during the morning's exertion. He was pale. The blue eyes were red at the edges. He walked toward me. He stopped 1 step away. Josephine. I took my coat from the arm of the chair where I'd hung it when I came in. I put it on. I'm not leaving today, I said. Elowen is still asleep. Maribel hasn't finished the rosary. I'm leaving tomorrow. Josephine. The courage to save is different from the courage to stay, Connor. I've already proven the first. You haven't yet proven the second. I turned to the door. I stopped with my hand on the frame. I didn't look back. You have until tomorrow to decide which of the two you have. And I left. Chapter 5. The Courage to Stay. Connor left the main room without looking at me. I stood there with my coat over my arm. listening to his footsteps go down the side corridor to the door that opened onto the lake porch. Maura had left about 20 minutes earlier, escorted in silence by two men who seemed to be carrying a shadow, rather than a woman. The captains dispersed. Declan stayed near the stairs, talking quietly with Finn. Maribel appeared at the top of the stairs when she heard the silence return, the rosary clutched between her fingers as if she prayed only to have something to do with her hands. Elowen appeared behind her, barefoot, the skillet still in her lap. She hadn't let go of it since the morning that changed everything. It was strange how a house that enormous could suddenly feel so small. I went up to the room they'd given me and began folding the few things I'd brought. A shirt of my mother's, Elowen's gray sweater, the sewing kit I carried out of habit since my first shift, the red scarf, washed, folded, still with a faint stain near the fringe that hadn't come out. I rested my hand on the fringe for a second, then I packed it away. I knocked on my mother's door and said, plainly, that we were leaving before nightfall. Maribel didn't argue. She just looked at me in that way of hers, the look of someone who already knew but was waiting for me to say it. Elowen appeared in the hallway with the skillet still in her hand and asked if she could at least take it home. I laughed. It was the first sound of laughter to come out of me in hours. You can, I said. You won it. I went down to the kitchen to get water. That's when my mother caught up with me on the first steps, with a cup of tea in her hands. This one isn't for you, Maribel said. It's for him. Mom. Sweetheart. She stopped on the step below mine, lifted her chin. You packed your bags. Lovely. Now, let me do one thing before you come down to put them in the car. I didn't answer. Maribel passed me with the cup steady and went down the side corridor, toward the porch door. I stood on the stairs, without the courage to go down, and without the courage to follow. I sat on a step. Elowen appeared again, sat one step up, rested her chin on my shoulder, and stayed silent. It was a good silence. The kind you forget can exist between two sisters. Outside, I couldn't hear, but I imagined. I didn't know what my mother was going to say. I found out later, because she told me, years later, in that way of hers of revealing a secret only when the secret no longer needs to be a secret. But, at that hour, sitting on the mansion stairs with Elowen on my shoulder, I only knew that my mother had taken tea to a man who had doubted me over 40 seconds of audio, and that, somehow, that made me less alone than I deserved to feel in that moment. When Maribel came back, she was without the cup. He's coming up, was all she said, and went up. I heard the footsteps before I saw him. Connor stopped in the corridor, a few meters from me, still in his suit, the shirt rumpled at the chest where the fever had soaked it the night before. He had a clean dressing underneath. Someone had redone it, but it hadn't been me. He looked at Elowen. Elowen understood without needing a word, stood up, took the skillet, and gave me a kiss on the top of my head before going down, pretending she had something urgent with Finn. Connor sat on the step where my sister had sat, not too close, but not too far either. I doubted you, he said. I looked ahead, at the banister. I know. I shouldn't have doubted. I know that too. He breathed in deeply. I felt his breathing beside me, slower than normal, like someone measuring each word before letting it out. My father died in an ambush when I was 19, Connor said. I took over the family that same month. I didn't have time to grieve. I had time to learn that trusting someone was opening a door to being shot in the back. I lived like that for 20 years, and then you showed up in an alley with a red scarf saying you wouldn't let another man die on the ground. I looked at you and thought, either she's the most dangerous person I've ever met, or she's the first person I'll manage not to ruin. He stopped. I kept looking at the banister. I ruined it, he said. I swallowed the knot. I didn't answer. When that recording reached my hand this morning, I didn't believe it. His voice grew lower. I just didn't believe in myself. 20 years of taught distrust spoke louder than 1 week of a woman who treats me like a person. And you deserved that they speak louder this entire week. You deserved that they speak louder for 5 minutes. But I didn't know how. I never knew how to do this right. And I ask forgiveness without asking for a promise of a beautiful world, because I don't have a beautiful world to give you. I only have the truth that I doubted and that I shouldn't have. I turned my head slowly. I looked at him. Connor Kavanagh was sitting on a stair with the dressing showing under his shirt, without a suit, without 300 men, without the chain on display. It was just him. And even so, he remained the hardest thing to look at that I'd ever known. My father died because no one stopped their car, I said. I ran into the street to look for help. The cars swerved around me. I was 12 years old, and I'd stand in the middle of the street waving my arms, and the cars swerved around me. When one finally stopped, it was already too late. I swallowed. I promised myself I'd never be a car that swerves around. When I knelt in that alley, I didn't even know who you were. But when you woke up in my living room and looked at me as if I were the first person in 20 years who wasn't asking anything of you, I stayed. And then it was for you. He closed his eyes for a second. I know. You're not going to doubt again, I said. It wasn't a question. No. And when you do doubt, he opened his eyes. He almost smiled. Then you knock on the door and remind me of the alley. I stood up. He stood up with me. We stood facing each other, on the landing. And I saw it was the same step height where we'd almost kissed that first week, before Declan called about the ports. It was funny how a house that enormous had only one real place for two people to meet. I want to introduce you to them, Connor said. Now, before tonight? Introduce me how? As the woman I choose, not as a possession, not as shelter, not as gratitude, as a choice. I want every man in that room to know that anyone who touches you answers to me personally. I want your mother to hear it. I want your sister to hear it. I want you to hear it. Out loud. I swallowed another knot. I nodded. We went down together. The key men were already gathered in the great hall, the way important meetings in the house worked. Declan in the corner, hands crossed. Finn near the door, with that way of his of pretending he wasn't paying attention so he could listen better. The three captains standing, broad shoulders, black suits. My mother and Elowen sitting on the side sofa, Maribel with the rosary, Elowen with the skillet, and in that moment I understood that the skillet had become a symbol of something I couldn't name. Connor stopped in the middle of the room. I stood beside him, half a step back, because that was what my body knew how to do. He reached his hand back without looking, and pulled mine up to stand beside him, in the same line. "This is Josephine Kerrigan," he said. His voice had gone back to being a boss's voice, but with a layer beneath it that I'd never heard before. She found me in an alley when no one else was going to stop. She cared for me without knowing my name. She faced 300 men on her front porch without taking off her apron. She endured a lie to my face this morning, without striking back with a lie. I doubted her for an hour. I'm not going to doubt again. And whoever in here decides to doubt for me, answers to me. Whoever touches her, her mother, or her sister answers to me. Not to Declan, not to Finn, to me, personally. Silence. Declan tilted his head once. Slowly. The three captains lowered their chins in the same second, as if they'd been trained to agree as a single body. Finn didn't move. My mother clutched the rosary between her fingers without crying. She only closed her eyes for a long moment, like someone giving away her daughter for the second time in her life. Elowen, from the sofa, met my eyes and made no joke. That's what tightened my chest. Connor looked at me. "Is this all right?" I laughed too. It was a short laugh, but it came out. "This is all right," I said. He squeezed my hand. He didn't let go. The night came unhurried. We had dinner. My mother insisted on cooking. Finn insisted on helping and ruined the salad. Elowen insisted on commenting on the ruined salad. Connor sat at the head and ate for real for the first time since he'd been shot. I looked at him, saw the color returning to his face, and thought it was funny how a warm kitchen with people talking too loud could undo a man who commanded 300. After dinner, my mother went to her room. Elowen faked dramatic sleepiness and went up. Finn vanished with Declan to some meeting that I knew didn't exist. Connor and I stayed at the foot of the stairs. He held out his hand. I placed mine on top. We went up one step at a time. On the landing, he stopped. He rested his forehead against mine. He breathed. "I never thought I deserved this," he said quietly. "I know," I whispered. He kissed me. It was short. It was the fullest thing a short kiss has ever managed to be. I closed my eyes. We kept going up. At the top of the stairs, he stopped once more, rested his hand on the nape of my neck, and stayed like that for a whole second, without saying anything, as if he needed to prove with his body that I really had decided to stay. Then he turned off the corridor light. The bedroom door closed behind us. The morning came pale, with the light off the lake coming in filtered through the curtain. I woke first. Connor was already awake, lying on his back, looking at the ceiling with his hand intertwined in mine on top of the sheet. He was in no hurry to move. Neither was I. "How long have you been awake?" I asked. "I don't know." He turned his head to look at me. "I was afraid you'd disappear if I closed my eyes." "I didn't disappear." "No." He squeezed my hand. I squeezed back. We went down to the lake porch in pajamas, with coffee. Down below, from the kitchen, my mother was praying too loud on purpose. in a way that only Elowen and I knew to recognize as provocation disguised as faith. Elowen shouted from her bedroom window that this time she'd known since the first night, and that nobody had to fake surprise. Finn passed by the porch pretending to check the perimeter, saw us sitting side by side with the same cup, and changed direction with the fake urgency of someone who'd remembered a most important door at the other end of the house. I laughed. It was a different laugh from the day before, looser, more mine. Connor turned his head to look at me laughing, and stayed looking like someone who needed to memorize it. "What is it?" I asked. "Nothing. Liar. Nothing I know how to say yet." I rested my head on his shoulder. The lake was still, the snow on the banks beginning to melt for the first time of the season. I felt his chest rise and fall slowly. I felt my hand inside his hand. I felt that the night had happened, and the morning had come, and the two of us were still there. That's when Declan appeared at the end of the porch. He didn't approach. He just stood there, with that way of his of only interrupting when he really needed to. Connor turned his head slowly. Declan lowered his chin a millimeter, a sign that it was important, but not urgent enough to ruin the morning. "Later," Connor said. "Later," Declan agreed. But before leaving, he looked at me. It was quick. It was the kind of look a man like Declan Brennan gave when he wanted another person to understand something without needing words. I smiled at him. He lowered his chin again, and left. I kept my head on Connor's shoulder a while longer, listening to my mother pray down below, Elowen fight with the toaster, Finn pretend he had something urgent to do on the porch on the other side. Connor's hand squeezed mine lightly, and I closed my eyes. But, before closing them, I saw Declan standing again at the end of the house's corridor, talking quietly with Finn, and a small thing inside me, something I couldn't name in that second, took note. Chapter 6, What Lingers in the Air. The morning stretched out, as if the lake had decided to hold time on its own. I stayed a while longer on the porch with Connor before going up to change. The coffee had gone cold in the cups, and neither of us had minded. He'd said, quietly, that he wanted to show me something outside the mansion. He didn't explain what. I didn't ask. I was tired of asking out loud what my body already trusted in silence. When I came down in jeans and a simple blouse, Connor was in the hall with his black coat folded over his arm, and the keychain visible in the opening of his shirt. Maribel passed by us with a cloth basket and pretended, with all the elegance available to her, that she didn't see his hand touch my back to guide me to the door. Elowen, from the kitchen, shouted that if we were going to run away, we should take the skillet. "Has it retired?" asked Connor, stopping in the middle of the hall. "I've promoted it to family symbol," answered my sister, without looking. Connor laughed quietly. It was a contained sound, almost involuntary, as if he laughed in spite of himself. I was beginning to collect these laughs of his without realizing it. We got in the car. Finn drove. Declan stayed at the mansion. We left by the road that wound around Lake Erie and drove for about 20 minutes until a packed dirt lane that cut in through a row of old trees, the kind that had lost their leaves in winter and still managed to look important. The roots rose up through the ground like visible nerves. The air was colder there, with the smell of damp earth and something green I couldn't name. The house appeared at the end of the lane. It was small. Dark roof, pale wood walls lightly peeling with age. A side porch with an old swing whose seat still held the shape of whoever had sat there. There was a garden with bare apple trees, a stone bench stained with moss at the edges, a low wire fence. Behind the house, I saw a patch of abandoned vegetable garden. The earth was hard, but not dead. Connor stopped in front of the door without going in. He stood looking at the facade as if he were reading something written in the woodwork. "It's been mine since before," he said. "I bought it last winter. I didn't tell anyone. Why? Because I didn't know yet why I'd bought it." He looked at the apple trees. "Now I know." I looked at him. His profile against the gray sky had that habitual firmness, but there was something different in the posture. His shoulders a little lower, his hands in his pockets instead of crossed at his chest. It was the version of him I was learning to recognize. The version that didn't need to take up all the space. "I'm not asking you for anything," Connor said, without looking back at me. "I'm not proposing a change of life. I'm not proposing a ceremony. I just wanted you to see that I wanted another life before I knew you existed, and that this other life looks like a garden with an old tree." I swallowed. I didn't answer. I walked to the stone bench, ran my hand over the cold, rough surface, sat. Connor sat beside me. We stayed that way for a while, without speaking, with the wind rocking the empty swing on the porch. It was the kind of silence I hadn't heard in any house since the year my father died. The kind that asks nothing of whoever stays inside it. "I'd like to talk to your mother again," Connor said afterward. His voice came out lower than normal, with a care he probably didn't realize he'd put there. "About what?" "About protecting the three of you. Forever. Regardless of what happens between you and me. Even if one day you decide to walk out the door and not come back, your mother and your sister stay protected. I want her to hear that in plain words, not through the absence of any action on my part." I swallowed another knot. There were many knots in 24 hours. I was getting good at swallowing. "She'll accept," I said, "but she'll offer you tea first." "I already had her tea yesterday. Today it's my turn to say something." I looked. "And was it the tea that made you come up?" He nodded, without smiling. "Your mother said only one thing. She said her daughter had already cared for worse men than I thought I was." I laughed quietly. It was exactly the kind of thing Maribel would say. Small, short, devastating. The kind of thing she tossed into the air so naturally that it took you a second to understand the size of what had landed. We stayed in the garden for about 40 minutes. Connor walked to the abandoned vegetable patch, crouched, took a handful of dark earth between his fingers to check the consistency, the moisture. He said it could be planted again in spring. I said my mother would want rosemary. He nodded seriously, as if making a mental note and not about to forget it. We went back to the mansion before lunch, with the smell of cold earth still on the sleeve of my coat. Elowen was sitting on the entrance step with Finn standing beside her, arms crossed and eyes fixed on a neutral point on the horizon, in a visible effort to seem busy with nothing. When the car pulled up, she stood and came to the door with the smile of someone who'd known for much longer than she should have. "Where's the ring?" she asked, without a greeting. "It's not that," I answered. "Mom!" shouted Elowen, turning toward the inside of the house. "Why, it's not the ring yet." Maribel appeared at the door, drying her hands on her apron with the calm of someone who hadn't been summoned. "I didn't ask," she said. "I know," said Elowen. "But I'm relieved," added my mother, and went back to the kitchen as if the conversation had ended in the only way possible. Connor looked at me. I looked at him. We laughed together, quietly. It was the third time. I'd already lost count trying not to count. In the afternoon, after lunch, Connor called Finn into the study. I passed through the corridor and heard his voice saying, in the exact tone of someone issuing a decree with no possibility of appeal, "As of today, you are responsible for the well-being of the Kerrigans. Maribel, Josephine, Elowen. Anything that's lacking, it's lacking on you." Finn made the sound of someone who'd been gently run over by an institution. "My boss. Finn. Elowen throws skillets. You'll manage." I held in my laughter until I turned the corridor. It was at that moment, going back to the living room, that I saw Declan standing near the hall window. He had his phone in his hand, but he wasn't speaking. He was just looking at the lake with that quiet attention I'd learned to recognize as his version of thinking out loud. The reflection of the water hit him in irregular waves. I hesitated in the doorway. Declan turned his head, saw me, lowered his chin slightly in greeting. He didn't call me, but he didn't go back to the window either. I understood, by some instinct I couldn't name, that he wanted me to know he'd seen me. Connor came out of the study minutes later. Declan approached him unhurriedly, with the two slow, deliberate steps of someone who didn't need urgency to be taken seriously. When he spoke, his voice came out so low that from where I stood not a single syllable reached me. It was just one sentence, a whisper. Connor stood still for 2 seconds, as if the air around him had suddenly grown heavy. Then he nodded once. Slowly, Declan left. Connor turned to me, from across the hall. He tried to smile. He almost managed, but his eyes didn't follow. "Coffee?" he asked. "What did he say?" He hesitated. It was the first hesitation I'd seen in him since the step of the stairs the night before. A small second, but one I recognized, and it was enough to understand it was something he preferred to carry alone for now, not from a lack of trust, but from the kind of protection he hadn't yet learned to let go of. "Mora didn't act alone," he said, after a length of time that was too long. "There was someone outside paying for her silence. Someone who knows this house from the inside for too long to be a stranger. Declan is after the name, and when the name comes, I'll tell you before anyone." I looked at him. I didn't insist. We'd just learned that trust was the hardest part of anything. I was going to trust that, when the time came, he would tell me. And he was going to trust that, when I asked for real, he would answer. For now, coffee. The afternoon turned to evening without my noticing the exact transition. The light off the lake grew golden, then copper-colored, then that dull blue that comes before real night, when the horizon can no longer decide between the two colors. Maribel took a wool blanket from the closet and brought it to the porch without anyone asking. Elowen complained about the cold and went to fetch another. Finn appeared with hot chocolate in 4 cups, without receiving any order, and announced, with the most neutral face in the world, that it was the boss's order. I sat on the porch swing. Connor sat beside me. I laid my head against his chest, beneath the collar of his open coat, and smelled him up close. Simple soap, wool, something that was only his, and that I'd already begun to recognize in the middle of any room in the mansion without needing to look. He put his arm behind my head. His hand fell on my shoulder and stayed there, firm, with just the right weight, the kind that doesn't hold you down, only accompanies you. Sleepy? He asked. Yeah, you can sleep. I closed my eyes. The swing moved slowly, the light creak of old wood marking the rhythm. My mother prayed quietly from the other corner of the porch, this time without provocation or audience, just out of faith. Elowen had leaned her head against the jamb and snored softly, her hair in front of her face. Finn, somewhere I couldn't see without opening my eyes, coughed awkwardly every 3 minutes as if it were the only way he had of continuing to exist in a scene that wasn't in his plans. I thought, without meaning to think, that it was strange how a woman who had spent her whole life chasing closed doors had managed, in a little more than a week, to sit on a swing with her head on the chest of a man who commanded 300, and then, for a second, small, almost weightless, the kind you forget before you finish thinking it, I wondered whether a man who had commanded 300 men could really belong to one woman alone. It wasn't fear. It wasn't a shadow. It wasn't regret. It was just a question from a quiet late afternoon. I opened my eyes for a moment and looked up. Connor had his chin resting lightly on the top of my head, his gaze fixed on the lake, on the dark water that reflected the last blue of the sky. His hand squeezed my shoulder lightly, slowly, not knowing that I'd asked. I closed my eyes again, and slept. Lena here, that wraps up Book 1, and I've already finished Book 2. You can get access to it for a really small fee. On the very same day that Josephine carried within her body the secret that would change everything, the audio exploded across the family server. 40 seconds. Her voice, crystal clear, handing over the exact address, the precise time, and the model of the armored car. Hours later, the attack. Gunshots shattering glass, Josephine's mother bleeding on the asphalt, her sister in a deep coma, machines beeping like an endless lament. The entire family turned against her. Eyes that had once respected her now spat venom. Traitor. Accomplice. Connor, the man who had sworn to protect her with his own life, didn't say a word. No denial. No roar of fury in her defense. Only icy silence, a curt nod for them to take an escort and a doctor, and then close doors while he investigated alone, without giving her a chance to explain. Josephine waited. She begged with her eyes. He didn't touch her. He didn't defend her. The humiliation burned deeper than any bullet. That night, she left a letter on his pillow, took only what was necessary, and walked out without looking back, carrying alone the weight he didn't even dream existed. What Connor lost in that silence, no one will ever be able to give back. And what if the audio was a lie? And what if the real traitor still breathed inside the house? And what if the price of his silence was a life that would never come back? How long can a powerful man endure carrying the emptiness he himself created? Like I said, that was just a taste of Book 2. To watch it uncensored, just click on the first link here in the pinned comment. I'll see you on the other side in a few seconds. Remember, just click on the first link down here in the comments, and Book 2 complete, no ads, no interruptions, will already be available for you. It's very simple. Book 2 is something I'm loving making. You're loving it too, so I promise there will be more. It's where you find increasingly spicy stories, a true dark romance. And precisely because this version is getting more and more heated, the video isn't well accepted publicly on YouTube. This closed environment is where I can actually share my essence and where I feel free to do my best work for you. More news coming soon. I'll be waiting for you on the other side. Unfortunately, many people have been downloading our audio, effectively copying the entire story and simply reposting it on YouTube. If you want to watch the original story and be the first to receive the next ones, search for My Stories by Lena on YouTube to get the best dark romance content. Remember, the official channel is My Stories by Lena on YouTube. I'll be waiting for you there. Congratulations! Your purchase has been confirmed, and you now have full access to books 1 and 2 of all our stories, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Everything is available on the My Stories platform, from Mafia romance and Billionaire romance to our spicier tales. This content is ready for you now, with new episodes added daily. Access is simple. Just log in using the same email address you used for your purchase. A confirmation has also been sent to that same email. The My Stories platform is very simple and intuitive. Each image represents a story. If it has a book too, just click and press play. Everything is already unlocked for you. You can also rate each story, leave a like, and write a comment. Your feedback will be visible to all our other subscribers. This is our romance universe, so please feel free to interact. From this moment on, this is officially your home for romance stories. Just head over to mystoriesromance.com and press play. Welcome to the family.